In this video, we're going to learn how to use Amazon Cognito to authenticate users into your application. What is Cognito? Amazon Cognito is an AWS service that provides user authentication and authorization for web and mobile applications. Why would we want to use it? Why don't we just use the database users table and hash passwords? Well, application authentication and security has evolved over the years. Users expect to be able to log in with social providers such as Google or Facebook, use multi-factor authentication or MFA, and single sign-on. Requirements for securely storing users' personally identifiable information or PII also became stricter. If you are in a health industry, you may have to comply with a HIPAA or PCI if you are in e-commerce. Obviously, all of this makes creating authentication service of your application fairly complex. That's why services like Cognito and Auth0 sprung up. They offload complexity from developers while making money for themselves. Let's take a look how to make our life as developers easier and use Cognito authentication for our application. We will be building an authentication for a simple 3-page application. When a user is not logged in, they can only access the landing page. They cannot access, for example, dashboard page or admin page. When a user clicks on Get Started button, they're redirected to the login page. And on the login page, they can sign in with Google or with an existing account by entering their email address. Or they can also create an account. Here, they can sign up using email address and password. After user enters their password and they click on the next button, they are prompted to enter their password, or they can use a forgot password option to restore their password and to get the code into their email. Let's go ahead and enter password. If the password is not entered correctly, you're obviously going to have a notification that you input incorrect username or password. And after user enters their correct password, they're prompted for a multi-factor authentication. After multi-factor authentication is entered correctly, user is redirected to the dashboard. When on the dashboard, right, if the user is admin, they can also access an admin page. And here we can see the username right here, and if the user wants to log out, they can also log out. So while authenticated, the user cannot access the landing page anymore. If they try to do it, since the user is logged in, they will be redirected to the dashboard. Let's go ahead and sign out and try to sign in with Google. Let's go ahead and click Get Started button again. We are redirected to a login screen, and we'll click Sign in with Google. And it looks like I'm already authenticated with Google, so I don't have to enter my credentials into Google. So I'm getting redirected to dashboard, and my Google user, you can see it's different from the user that is logging in with the email. Now we have a different name right here, and also you can see that there is no admin link here to the admin page because this user is not an admin. Okay, well, let's go ahead and log out and see how we can implement this application authentication. Before diving into the code, let's review what happens behind the scenes when we use Cognito authentication for our app. When a user clicks on Get Started, the user is redirected to Managed Login. Managed Login is a Cognito website that is linked to your user pool and app client. It can perform sign in, sign out, and password reset operations for your users. So instead of using UI components for authentication, our app invokes Cognito's Managed Login webpage in the user's browser. After user enters credentials in the Managed Login, Cognito will validate credentials and prompt for MFA. After MFA code is entered, Cognito redirects to the application callback endpoint with the authorization code. The callback route of the application uses Cognito's token endpoint to get tokens in exchange for the code. This exchange is done on the backend using POST request. This is a lot more secure than doing it in the browser, and this is why it is important that your application has a BFF or backend for frontend. If the code, client ID, and client secret are correct, Cognito will return ID token, access token, and refresh token. In this tutorial, we will use the data in the ID token to create a session, and we will discard access and refresh tokens. In the future videos, I will show you how to use access and refresh token, so please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned. Besides the data from the access token, we can also use additional data in the session, such as if a user is an admin. We will be able to retrieve this data from the database since we now have user ID from the token ID. After creating the session, we will render authenticated content, which is a fancy way of saying we will redirect user to the dashboard. And the final things to mention here is that the process of redirection, obtaining a code and exchanging it for the tokens is called Auth 2.0. And the way we got the ID token, we will need specific scopes for that. How the ID token is structured and what information it provides, it's called OpenID Connect or OIDC. OIDC overlays on top of Auth 2.0. Now that we know how our application will interact with Cognito, let's set up Amazon Cognito. In order to authenticate users in our application, we will need three things: user pool, this is basically a user directory, managed login, and client application. Back in the days, you had to set them up separately. Nowadays, we can set them up in one go. I am in AWS console in Amazon Cognito section. Let's create user pool. We are prompted with a screen where we can set up resources for our application, and Cognito asks us to define the application. It can be traditional web application, single page application, or SPA, mobile app, and machine-to-machine application. The name of the application, let's call it React Router Cognito Auth. Next, we need to select an option for a sign-in identities in Configure Option section. You can have select email, phone number, or username, or you can select two of them or one of them. We will just select email. Also, we have a drop-down to select the required attributes for sign up, and you can present it with a lot of these default attributes where you can put address, birthday, email, family name, phone number, etc. But for our purposes, we will just select a name changed after the app has been created. Finally, let's add a return URL. It's also known as a callback URL. This is where Cognito will redirect to this URL with a code, right? And we will provide this HTTP localhost running on the port 5173, and it's going to be auth callback, the route we're going to create. And later on, we can actually update this URL, or you can add more callback URLs. Now, let's click on Create User Directory, and we're basically all set. That's how easy you can create a Amazon Cognito for your application authentication. Right? So here you have a few sections where it asks you to check the login page, which you can click and see your login page right here. What else you can do is you can also build authentication component, and it gives you a quick setup guide. However, we're not going to use that. Let's go ahead and scroll down to the very bottom and click Go to Overview. This page provides you an overview of the user pool, gives you the basic user pool name, user pool ID, and ARN. It also have a token signing key URL, which is basically a well-known URL. So if you click on it, it's going to give you the keys, right, that you can use when validating the token that comes from Amazon Cognito. On the left-hand side, let's click on App Clients under the application. So we have one client right here that we named React Cognito Auth. So let's click into this app client, and we can see the client information, and we have client ID and client secret that we're going to be using later. Also, we have information about authentication flow duration. It's about 3 minutes. Refresh token will expire in 5 days, and access token expires in 60 minutes, and ID token will also expire in 60 minutes. We can click on Edit button here to edit app client information. Here you can update your app client name and choose other authentication flows, but we keep the authentication flows as is. We also have authentication flow session duration here. You can change refresh token expiration, right? Your refresh token can live up to 10 years, but obviously you're going to choose whichever time makes sense for your application. Also, you can update the access token and ID token expiration time. Let's go ahead and cancel out of it. Besides the quick setup guide, you also have a tab with attribute permissions, and it tells you what attribute permissions your application basically have. You can read all these attributes and write to them, except for email verified. So this Cognito will actually write to this when email is verified. The next tab is login pages, and this is a managed login pages configuration. So it has allowed callback URLs here. It lists what's your identity provider, what kind of grant types you have, and what scopes for OpenID Connect. This is actually a pretty important page, so you can click on Edit, and right here, you can update your callback URL if you made a typo, or you can add another URL if you like, right? If you have multiple callback URLs. You can also add allowed sign out URL if you wish. And then here in identity providers, you can select your identity providers. Currently, our identity provider is Cognito user pool. Later, when we configure Google, the Google will be also listed as an identity provider, and we can select that. The next thing we have is auth grant types. Currently, authorization code grant type is selected, but you can have implicit grant and client credentials. Implicit grant is not very secure anymore, and client credentials you will select when you are creating machine-to-machine app, or you will need a machine-to-machine token that can be used for background processes. Next, we have OpenID scopes right here. So this is basically what information will be contained in the ID token. So it's going to have an email. There is also scope OpenID and the phone. We actually do not have phone, so we can remove that. However, what we're after is actually this profile, right? This will give us the name of the user. So we want to select the profile right here. So now our scopes include email, OpenID, and profile. And finally, you can also add your custom scopes. However, no custom scopes are configured, so you cannot select anything. Let's go ahead and click on Save Changes. So besides login pages, there is also Threat Protection tab where you can configure threat protection, and Analytics where you can configure your analytics. Next, on the left-hand side, under User Management, let's click on Users, and this is basically your user directory, right? So you will create, or your application will create the users, right? And then, verify the email, and it will show you confirmation status and status of the user. You can also use user import. If you are migrating to Amazon Cognito, you can have a CSV list of the users that you can import. Under user management, there is also groups. So you can basically create groups and add users to them, and groups can be used to add permissions to the access tokens for multiple users. Next, let's click on Authentication Methods under Authentication, and here you can have an email section. So currently, your email provider is sending emails with a Cognito. However, when you go live, right, you will need to configure your SES, right? Simple email service. And here, if you click on Edit, you basically can select your SES, and then you need to put the from email configuration set, right, and reply to email. But now we're just using our Cognito in development, and we can just send the emails with Cognito. For example, when a user requests to change a password, or they forgot a password. Let's go ahead and cancel out. The next section is SMS, so you can also configure your SMS. And if you have a phone number, right, if you collect the phone number from your users, under SMS, you also have a password policy. You can click on Edit as well, and here you can change what kind of requirements you ask user for their password, right? There's usually keep it Cognito default. It's pretty good and pretty secure. And then, if you choose custom, you can actually change requirements for the passwords. So let's go ahead and cancel out of here. And finally, you have a section of a passkey. It's a little bit out of scope of this tutorial, but you can here edit passkey configuration as well. Next, let's click on Sign In under Authentication, and you can see right here, Sign In page. So you have a Cognito user pool as a sign in option. The next card tells you about options for choice-based sign-in. If you can click Edit, you can see that you can choose available options, right? You can have email message one-time password or SMS message one-time password, or you can choose the passkey. The next card, it says multi-factor authentication. Currently, there are no MFA selected. Let's click Edit. So here we can actually select Require MFA because we want to have multi-factor authentication for our login, and then we can just select what we want to use. Normally, most people use authentication apps nowadays, so let's select Authenticator app. Go ahead and save changes. The next card is device tracking. If you click in there, you can either user opt in for the device tracking, right? So they can opt in for it, you can select it, or you can have it always remember device tracking, and this can be used for multi-factor authentication, so the user don't have enter the multi-factor authentication code if the device is remembered. For our purposes, let's just keep don't remember user device and cancel out. Finally, you have a user account recovery card. Here you also can edit the recovery methods. Currently we have self-service account recovery, and we use email if available, otherwise SMS. Next, let's go to sign up under authentication, and you have the sign up information here. The first card talks about attribute verification, user account confirmation. If you click on it, right, we can see that we have email message to verify email address. However, you can select SMS message if you want to verify phone number. Let's go ahead and cancel out here. The next card is required attributes, right, but we cannot change it. This was the warning that Cognito gave us when we were creating user pool. Also, you can add your own custom attributes on the next card here. It's called custom attributes. As you saw, there were a lot of attributes that Cognito provides out of the box. However, if you want to create your own custom attributes, you can add them here. And finally, you have a self-service sign-up card. So let's go ahead and click Edit. Currently, self-registration is enabled. However, if for some reason you don't want users to be able to sign up, only log in, you can disable it here by unchecking Enable Self-Registration. Let's go ahead and cancel out here. And we'll go to the next page that is called Social and External Providers. On this page, you can add more identity providers. Currently, user pool is our identity provider, but you can also add different ones like a social identity provider, Google or Facebook. Then you can also sign in with Amazon and Apple. You can use SAML or OpenID Connect. So later on, we're going to be configuring Google, but the way the Cognito works, it basically uses Google as OpenID Connect. Google provides the information in ID token, and then Cognito actually remaps Google token into its own token, and there is a middleman, so you don't have to have a logic in your application to check, well, it's an ID token from Google, then I do this. If it's from my Cognito user pool, I do that, right? Cognito kind of takes out this work, and just provides you a uniform token no matter which identity provider user chooses to sign up with. The next page here is called extensions. If you go here, you can configure your Lambda triggers. So Lambda triggers are pretty useful, right? So you can use Lambda trigger when user signs up to check certain information and maybe add it to the user attributes, or when user signs in, right? You can basically look up if the user is admin, and you can change scopes in your token, ID token or access token on the fly with this Lambda functions. So these Lambda triggers are pretty useful. Let's go ahead and cancel out here. The next section is security. You can use AWS WAF or Web Application Firewall, for example, if you're using machine-to-machine tokens, right? So you don't want users to constantly request those tokens, and they cost you money. Cognito will charge it for you, so you can basically put a rate limiting here, right? And you can enable WAF, which is actually recommended, but we're just gonna keep use WAF with your user pool unchecked right here. The next page under security is threat protection, right? You can actually enable threat protection, but for that you need to have a plus plan. Currently we're on the lowest plan. And finally here in the security you have a log streaming. Again, for log streaming you will need to have a plus plan. Next we have a branding section, right? Let's click on the domain under the branding section, and here we have the domain configuration, and we have this Cognito domain. That's where you look for a Cognito domain if you need it for your application, or you will need it, for example, to have a Google authentication to configure it. Then that's where you can use your domain. We can actually have some action here. You can edit your Cognito domain and branding. Before managed login, there used to be such thing as hosted UI, and now it's kind of classic, and basically Cognito will probably deprecate it, so always have it under managed login selected here. Besides out of the box Cognito domain, you can also create a custom domain, and here you can put your own domain, so user won't even know that they redirected to a different place to enter their credentials. Obviously, for that you will also need a certificate manager right here to configure your domain. So let's go ahead and cancel out of here. Finally, you have a section for a resource servers, and resource server is a remote server that authorizes access based on Auth2 scopes and access tokens. So basically that's the section where you configure your scopes, right? So if you have a custom scopes, you can configure them here and then select them in your app client where we saw selecting custom scope section. Under branding, we also have a managed login page, and that's where you can update styles, configure basically your managed login so it looks exactly like your other application, so visually user won't tell the difference. Besides styling your managed login, you can also add terms documents, which are basically end user consent documents, and the links to these documents will be displayed when user is signing up. Next, under the branding, we have a message templates page, and that's where you can create your templates for verification message, invitation message, or multi-factor authentication message, right? You can just click and edit them so you have consistent branding. So the final section here is settings. You can check feature plans right here. Currently we are on the Essentials plan, but there is also a Plus plan. Obviously we'll have to pay more for that, but Essentials is just pretty basic, but it also gives you a lot of functionality right here, as you can see. The next page under settings is tags, so you can add tags to your Cognito, and then obviously you have a deletion protection here. Currently we activated deletion protection, or it is activated by default for us, so in case someone tries to delete the user pool, so it won't allow to do it, but you can deactivate deletion protection from here. As you can see, Amazon Cognito is pretty comprehensive user management service and has a lot of functionality and configuration. So let's see how we can use this Amazon Cognito and this user pool in particular in our application to authenticate users. Let's look at the starting point of our application. As I explained earlier, for security reasons, it is better to use a BFF or backend for front-end application, which is the same as a full-stack application. There are two main choices out there, Next.js and React Router. I will be using React Router app, but what I'm going to show you will also work with Next.js as well. I am in Visual Studio Code. Here I have a basic React Router app created with npx create React Router at latest. As usual, the code to this video is in the description below. I made a few changes to add a landing page, dashboard, and admin pages. Let's quickly look at them. So we can open the app folder right here, and under the route, right, you can see that we have an index route which is a home page or a landing page, and we have a layout, and under the same layout, I'm scoping the dashboard and the admin routes, and they're in the routes folder under dashboard.csx and admin.csx. So if we go into the routes folder, we can see home and then index.csx. This is essentially our landing page, and then admin.csx will be the admin page, and the dashboard.csx will be the dashboard page. As you can see, they're pretty straightforward and simple, well, maybe except for the home page. It has a little bit more things here, like for example logos and get started button. We also have a shared layout that is for admin and the dashboard, and here in this shared layout we basically have a top navigation bar, right? It has dashboard link and admin link, and we're going to be using admin link if the user is admin. And finally, there is a logout button as well here. Now that you're familiar with the code of the application, let's add authentication to it. Since Auth 2.0 is a standard, there are many libraries out there that can make our life easier, but I prefer to use Remix Auth library. Remix Auth library works well with a React Router app, and basically it is inspired by Passport.js library, which is authentication library for Node.js and Express, and in a way it behaves kind of similarly. So it has strategies, right? One of them like form strategy, where you can use username and password. The other one is Auth 2.0 strategy. That's what we're going to be using. And if you want to connect GitHub, you can use GitHub strategy. Let's click on Auth 2.0. And here we have the documentation on how to use this strategy, and that's what we're basically going to be doing. So let's go ahead and install Remix Auth and Remix Auth Auth 2 libraries in our project. After the libraries are installed, let's create auth server.ts file in app services folder. We're going to put the following code in the file. So let's go ahead and quickly take a look at it. So we're going to do some imports here, like Authenticator from Remix Auth and the strategy and call challenge from Remix Auth 2.0. Plus we're going to do the type tokens, and we're going to import JWT and JWT payload from JSON Web Token. We haven't installed this library yet. We'll do it in a minute. Let's explain the code first. So the first thing that we're going to do, we will export the user type, and we'll have ID, email, name, and admin flag, true, false. Then we're gonna new up the authenticator from Remix Auth, and then this authenticator will use Auth 2 strategy, right? And that's what we're gonna be defining it. We will set the cookie, right? The name of the cookie, and then we also will need to put client ID and client secret. We put these variables into the .env file. We will also need to have an authorization endpoint, right? It's going to be our Cognito domain auth to authorized, as well as token endpoint, and will be auth to token. These endpoints are pretty standard, and they basically are part of auth 2.0 standard, and I'm going to show you in a minute where to find them. Finally, so we have redirect URL, right? It's going to be our local host, 5173 port, and auth callback. It's basically the same callback that we used for the Cognito. And also, you can optionally put a Cognito revocation endpoint, right? The most important here is also scopes, right? You need to specify scopes like OpenID, email, and the profile. And the scopes need to match the scopes that we defined when creating Cognito. Finally, the optional part is the code challenge method. We're going to be using S256. This is optional, but for the security purposes, you want to use it because this is basically more secure. So let's go ahead and define our environment variables, and also I'm going to show you where to get the authorize and token and revoke endpoints. Let's go ahead and create .env file so we can put our credentials in there. We will also predefine these environment variables, and let's go ahead and fill them out. Let's go to the user pool. We can click on a user pool right here. And as you can see, the first thing that you actually see right here on the overview of user pool, you have a token signing key URL, right? So that's the one I showed you. However, besides well-known endpoint as signing keys, you also have OpenID configuration endpoint that is also well-known. So let's put it in. It's OpenID configuration, and you can see now this is configuration for the OpenID. Here you have endpoint authorized. There is a logout endpoint, right, and the token endpoint. Basically, we will need the authorized endpoint, we will need the token endpoint, and we can have an optional revoke endpoint that we're using. So in order to get the domain, you just simply copy this domain right here, right? Or you can also find the Cognito domain if you go to the domain here on the left side in the Cognito, right? There's going to be the domain over here as well. So let's go ahead and put this domain into the environment variable. Now let's go ahead and get Cognito client ID and Cognito client secret. So for that, we're going to go to application, app clients, and we click on the app client that we created. And here you have client ID and client secret. So I'm going to copy those and put in the env variable. And then obviously for your secret, right, you want to keep it as secret, so you don't want to show it to anybody. So I'm just going to keep my secret as well. Now let's continue with auth server.ts file. So this auth server.ts file has a function that after exchange happens and you get the tokens, it gives you the tokens and the request. And now you can define the function or do whatever you want in this function. You know, I'm defining like a get user function. I'm passing to it tokens and the request. And you can have this function anywhere else in your code, but I put it right down below. So we're going to look at this in a minute. Because the final piece that you want to do, you can create a custom name for this strategy, right? So you can basically reference it in your code later on. Now let's take a look at the getUser function. So we retrieve an ID token with a method ID token on tokens, and then we're going to decode this token. Since it's a JWT or JSON Web Token, we will decode it with a JSON Web Token library, right? So let's go ahead and install that library with npm. We will also need to install the types for this library as well. Let's install them as dev dependencies. So after we decoded the information from ID token, we're gonna put it in the return, right? We have that user type where we have the ID, which would be a sub. Then email will be on the email, then name, and in the admin, we just hard code as true for now. Usually in your application, right, you're probably going to make a database call, and then you're going to decide, right, whether its user is a admin or not. The database will tell you, but for simplicity, this tutorial will just hard code the admin. Next, let's go ahead and define the auth callback endpoint in our application. This endpoint will basically receive the callback from Cognito and basically get the information from this getUser function and will create a session. So before we actually do that, let's define a session file. We can also put it in the services directory. In the session server.ts file, we're basically going to put a boilerplate code, right? You can just look it up in React Router app documentation in the session section. So what we're going to do, we'll just have a session data, which is a type of user that we are exporting or importing rather from auth.server file. And we also have a session flash data in case we have an error. We can flush our error in the session, right? It's going to be just a string. So what we're going to be doing here, we're going to be using cookie session storage. Usually you would want to use database or Redis for storing your sessions, right? But for simplicity here, we're just using the cookie session storage, and this cookie session storage won't allow you to store a lot of information, right? Just because the limit, I think it's like 4 kilobytes or something, but for our purposes, it will do. So here we're defining basically the cookie driver for our session storage. We'll just name, it's going to be HTTP only server can set that cookie. It's just going to be the path. The same site will be lax. We also will define app secret that will be in a .env file because we're going to be encrypting this cookie. And then we will define the secure property. It will be true only when our application is in production. It means at that time when it's running in production, it will send this cookie only during HTTPS requests. Let's go ahead and jump into the env file and define the node env as development. And also we can put app secret here. Now let's go ahead and define auth callback route. So let's go to app routes.cs file, right? And let's put the auth callback, and it's going to be in the routes auth callback.cs file. Let's go ahead and create that file. So let's go ahead and put the code in this file. Since Remix Auth library is going to do the heavy lifting for us, so code in this file will be fairly simple. We'll just do our imports, right? And then in the loader function, and it's going to be a loader function because redirect will be the get method. We will basically get the session from the cookie, and we will get the authenticator, authenticate, right? We'll get the Cognito auth strategy that we defined, and we also pass the request, and then we'll this function basically going to get us, or method will get us the user, right? And if we don't get a user in our session, we will put the error message and then redirect to the landing page. However, if we do get the user, means the authentication auth 2.0 process went well, we just put our user in the session and redirect to the dashboard. Also, we will not to forget to commit the session, putting it in the cookie. Now let's go ahead and update the code for the landing page here to account for this. So we're gonna put the following code here. Let's take a look at what we're gonna add. So obviously we'll just import the data and action args type from the React router. We'll do a couple more imports for the authenticator and to get session. And most importantly, we will add a loader function. So this function again will look for the session. If the session has user, right, it's gonna go and redirect the user to the dashboard. However, if we have error in this session, it was just gonna return the error. And another function that we're gonna add, it will be an action, meaning when somebody clicks on the button get started, right, we will invoke the authenticator authenticate method to basically initialize the auth 2.0 flow and basically get the tokens from the Cognito. In the index function itself, right, we're going to destruct error from loader data, and if this error exists, we can show this error, right, under the get started button if somebody clicked on it and something went wrong, right? So, but if somebody clicks on get started button, then we're gonna have a method post that will actually go to this action function, and the action function will trigger auth 2.0 flow. So we're done with authentication. Now we need to protect our routes, right? And those routes that we need to protect are admin and dashboard, right? Let's go to the dashboard route and update the code to the following. We will add a loader function, and in this loader function, we will check for the session. And if the session does not have a user, we will basically redirect back to the landing page, not allowing user to access our dashboard page. However, if there is a user, we will just return that user data, and in the dashboard function itself, we will destruct that data and we will just use it as a username. We know that name exists and we can show it on the dashboard. In the same way, let's go ahead and update the code in the admin.tx file. So let's put the following code in there. Again, we're going to have imports and the loader function, and this loader function, again, will check for the user. Obviously, if not user does not exist, we'll redirect to landing page. We will also check if user is admin, or here, rather, if user is not admin, right? And if the user is not admin, we just simply redirect the user to the dashboard. And if the user is there and the user is admin, we will return user's data, which we will use to, again, display the user's name. So this way, only admins will be able to access this page. Next, let's go ahead and update the code in a dashboard layout page. In this layout file, we're going to be basically doing two things. We're going to be hiding the admin link if the user is not an admin, and also displaying user's name to show in the right corner, when the user is logged in. For that, we will need to define a loader function. We'll get a session and get the user and return that user. Then in the layout function, we will destruct this user from loader data. And if the user is admin, we're going to show the admin link. However, if the user is not admin, we will hide that link. And also, if we have a user and we have a username, we will just display the username next to that avatar circle. So also what this layout function does, it lets user to log out. So when user clicks on the logout link, it will basically redirect to the logout route, and this route will be logging out user. So let's go ahead and define that route. In the app routes file, let's define the logout route, and let's go ahead and create the logout.ts file. So we're going to put the following code in there. Basically, this code will be fairly simple. So it's just going to have an action here because it will be a post route. So we'll have an action where we will get the session, and then we're going to destroy that session, right? Because we store all the information in that session. And after destroying it, we're basically going to be redirecting back to the landing page. And since there's no session anymore and no user, right, when somebody again attempts to access admin or dashboard pages, they will be redirected back to the landing page. Believe it or not, we're actually done. Let's spin up the code with an npm run dev. Let's go to the browser, and we have our application running on local host port 5173. Let's click Get Started. And we did get redirected to the sign-in page from the Cognito. We do not have an account, so let's go ahead and create an account. In order to sign up, we will be using a temp mail. So there is a convenient site, temp-mail.org, where you can get a temp mail for testing stuff. So let's use that. We can copy that email address and just put it in here. And then name, we can put our name. And then we can create a password. Obviously, there's requirements for this password, and Cognito just provides the UI to validate them. And then we can confirm the password. Optionally, users can actually click to show the password. All right, let's click on Sign Up button. And the confirmation code was sent to that email. Let's wait till it appears, and it actually appears pretty much right away. So you can click on the code, on the email rather, copy the code, and then we can just put it in. Okay, we click on confirm the account, and now multi-factor authentication kick in. So now we need to use the multi-factor authentication app to enter the code. Let's go ahead and do just that. Okay, now I'm gonna put my authentication code and then click sign in. And simply like that, I got signed in and used authentication code, right, MFA, and that was pretty easy. And since my user is admin, I can also see and access the admin page. And if I attempt to go to the landing page, for example, it will redirect me back to dashboard since I'm already logged in. And if I want to log out, all I have to do is just click on the log out button and I'm logged out. Now to log back in, right, you can do get started again button because going to the dashboard or admin pages won't work. So also if we go to Cognito and we can look at the users, right, we can see that there was a user created with an email and the email is verified. That's the user that we just created. And this is how easy you can add authentication to your application using Amazon Cognito. But we're not done yet. We will use a social identity provider so users can also log in into our application with Google. In order to add social login such as Google to our application using Cognito, we can go to Cognito user pool that we just created. On the left-hand side, under Authentication, we have social and external providers. Let's click on that, and we can click on Add Identity Provider. And here you have several options. You can do Facebook, Amazon, Apple, SAML, OpenID Connect. It's just the kind of general stuff. Or you can use Google, right? Let's go ahead and use Google here. We select Google. What we need to do here is we need to add client ID, client secret, and authorized scopes. And then we also need to map the attributes. Since we have one attribute name, right, we will need to map the attributes from Google. So how do we do that? You can click on the registration instructions right here, and it basically gives you the steps that you need to do in order to get the client ID and client secret from Google. So it tells us to go to developer account, create a project, and add the domain, and then create auth 2.0 credentials, and also add auth domain ID response URL. And then we can add auth client ID and client secret of Google to this identity provider configuration. So let's go ahead and do just that. Here I am in Google Developer Console. Let's go ahead and create a new project. We can call our project React Router App Cognito Auth. And we just leave as is, no organization. I don't think I have any, right? So, and we can click create. Right after we created this new project, but this looks like it still gives us the overview of the old project that I created. So we need to switch to the React Router App Cognito project, right? So I'm just going to make sure we are here. So it says Google Auth platform is not configured yet. We can just get started, right? So app information. We can use the same name for the app, React Router App Cognito Auth. Then supported email, right? You can select your email right here. So select your Google email, obviously, right? You can click next. Audience. Audience will be external audience. Then you can click next. On the contact information, you can put email address, whatever you want to be contacted. It doesn't have to be the same as your Google email address. Then you click next. You agree to Google API services and user data policy. And let's click continue and let's click create. Next, what we're going to do is to create auth client. So let's click on that. In the application type, let's select web application. The client name. We can name it Cognito Client. And now we need to add authorized JavaScript origins. That's what Cognito information was talking about, right? So we need to add a URI. So if we go back, right, it's going to tell us add your user pool domain. And we already know that we can go on the left-hand side right here. If we need to look up the domain right here on the domains, right? You can get your domain here. So, but I already have it copied. So let me just put it in. All right. And the next thing that we need to do is authorized redirect URI. So right here in Cognito in the step 5, the authorized redirect URI is basically your user pool domain / auth2 ID response. Let's go ahead and add that to Google. I copied it already as well, and I'm going to just paste it, right? And now we click Create button. All right, and that's what we have here. We have a client ID. So let's go ahead and copy this client ID. We can put it in our client ID in Cognito. Okay, let's click OK. and we got this Cognito client, right? And we also have a client secret right here. So you're going to copy this client secret and you can put it into your client secret right here in the Cognito as well. Next, we need to put the authorized scopes, right? And in our case, we're going to put the same scopes as we had before, right? We put the scopes OpenID, email, and profile. Let's go ahead and do just that. And you gotta make sure you separate your scopes with spaces. And finally, let's go ahead and map the name attribute to the Google attribute. So the one that we can use is the name attribute in Google attributes. So it's going to get mapped in our Cognito token, basically, right? So let's go ahead and do that. And I guess we're all set. So we can click Add Identity Provider. The next thing that we need to do is to add Google Identity Provider that we created to the login screen, right? So we can do that by going to App Clients in Cognito. We can create React Router Cognito Auth Client. And here we have login pages. So let's select that. We can click Edit. So now if we look at the Identity Provider section of the login configuration, if we click on a drop-down, we can also see the Google. So now we can use both Cognito User Pool as Identity Provider and Google as well. Let's select that. And all we have to do is to save changes. So let's go back to our application and start the dev server. But before we do that, let's go to auth server, the TS file, scroll down and put our user to be not an admin. So we can put admin false. Let's go ahead and run npm run dev. All right, the app is running. Let's go to the browser and let's click on Get Started. Now we got redirected to the login page and we can see there is sign in with Google button. Let's go ahead and click that. Okay, it's gonna ask me to choose an account. I'm gonna choose this account. The next screen will tell the user that the Cognito application is gonna have access to the name and the email. So we're gonna click Continue. And now you can see we are logged in into our application. You can see that the user is not admin anymore, so there is no link to the admin page. And even if the user decides to access admin, it's going to get redirected to the dashboard because the user is not admin. And this is all it takes to integrate social logins such as Google using Amazon Cognito. Now you've seen how to make authentication easier with Amazon Cognito, and if you found this video helpful, check out my video Node.js REST API Mastery, Build Powerful APIs with Express. It's the perfect next step. Click here and I'll see you there.